First off, I just want to give a little disclaimer saying that I do not condone the use of any legal or illegal mind-altering substances. The contents of this video are created purely for education. It's inevitable that there will be people who consume these substances. Therefore, it is extremely important to educate people on the effects and how to properly use them. So edible pot is a lot different than smoking it. It's more potent, it's processed in the body differently, and the effects last longer. The difference with edibles is that the active ingredient, the chemical that gets you high, THC, is processed in the liver before the user experiences any effects. The original THC from the edible is converted in the liver into a more potent metabolite, 11-hydroxy-THC. It's estimated that this compound is about 4 to 5 times more psychoactive than normal THC, and because the edible has to go through a portion of the digestive process before effects can be felt, it can take 30 minutes to as long as 2 hours before a user feels any effects. Because of this, people who don't feel any effects after an hour or so might want to redose, only to have the entire thing hit them like a train all at once an hour later. So my advice, just wait it out. It may take a while, but it will come on. And unlike smoking cannabis, in which the effects last about 2 hours and gradually drop off after a quick climax right after inhalation, edible pot takes its time before it reaches its peak in effect, and this peak lasts longer. Typically, the effects of edibles last 4 to 8 hours. When it comes to the effects, there are certainly similarities between smokable and edible weed, but there are some properties that appear to only occur strictly on edibles. There are 2 main reasons someone would want to consume an edible. The first is for medical benefit, such as aiding symptom relief of stress or anxiety, or to help one sleep. And the second is simply just for recreational purposes, just to have a high and have a good time. And aside from these 2 reasons, there are actually a few people in the psychedelic community who use edibles in very high doses in a similar way to what one would use LSD or magic mushrooms for, but we'll touch on that aspect at the end of the video. So now we are going to get into what you can expect to feel from the different doses of weed edibles. But firstly, it's important to know that tolerance is everything. Tolerance plays a huge role in your experience. And if you're an everyday pot smoker, you'll likely have to take a much larger dose of an edible than someone who has no tolerance to THC in order to feel the same effect. So take the following effects of doses I give with a grain of salt, as this is just generally what you can expect to feel when you take this particular dose. So first off, we have the microdose, and this ranges anywhere from 1 milligram to about 2.5 milligrams of THC. It's unlikely you'll experience any active effects from this dose, but it is possible for people who are hypersensitive to the effects of THC. This dose is more just for purposes such as mild relief of pain, stress, anxiety, etc. People who microdose THC edibles might also report increased creativity and focus. The effects of this dose are pretty passive. You likely won't feel any different fundamentally. This can be somewhat compared to people who microdose LSD and magic mushrooms who do so for similar purposes. Next, we have the low dose, which ranges from 2.5 milligrams to about 15 milligrams. And the 2 ends of the spectrum can be very different, especially for people with low tolerance to THC. Someone consuming the edible for medicinal purposes will experience stronger symptom relief. And this dose can also be used for people who have trouble sleeping. You may begin to feel a sense of euphoria and that classic high feeling where coordination is slightly impaired and overall perception is altered. But at this dose, the high is unlikely to be overwhelming, and because of this, this may be a good dose to try for a first timer. In my own experience, there isn't a significant difference between this dose of an edible and your average smoking weed high. The medium dose ranges from 15 to 30 milligrams. Someone with a decent THC tolerance still may not be feeling heavy effects here, but for many this dose can make them pretty high. It's at this dose that people may start to feel negative effects, such as anxiety and paranoia. You might ask, if people use weed for relief of anxiety and stress, then how could this dose bring on anxiety and stress? Well, THC has biphasic effects, which means the substance can have opposite effects in different doses. Anxiety can be reduced in lower doses, but can actually be stronger in higher doses. So if you're taking edibles for symptom relief, it is important to be aware of these biphasic effects the drug can have. Coordination and perception will likely be altered at this dose. The degree to which it is altered will likely depend on your tolerance. Some people might start to get the classic red eyes from being high. Maybe some people will experience closed eye visuals. For me personally, I tend to have a closed eye visual on low to medium dose weed that looks kind of like this. Let me know if you have experienced the same type of visual in the comments. The high dose ranges from 30 to 50 milligrams. This dose will likely bring a significant high, even to someone with tolerance. And for someone with low tolerance, this can bring an extreme high. Your coordination will definitely be impaired somewhat. You might feel a strong euphoria, maybe you'll feel very laughy. Some people's mouths get very dry and get cotton mouth. This is due to THC mimicking a naturally occurring chemical called anandamide, which binds to cannabinoid receptors in our saliva glands, which causes saliva production to decrease. You might also get the classic munchies and just want to absolutely binge eat. It's important to remember that the effects of THC impacts everyone differently, so no two people's high will be exactly the same, and you likely will only experience some of the effects I listed, not all. The very high dose ranges from 50 to 100 milligrams. I would say it's more likely than not that you will probably experience some negative effects at this dose. The high may become so intense you may feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed. People often experience a rapid heart rate, panic, nausea, and headaches at this dose, so definitely don't venture into this realm if you don't know what you're doing. For someone with an extremely high tolerance, this dose might not be too heavy, but for the average person, this will likely be overwhelming. There are still medicinal benefits at this dose, but is only used for people who really need it, as this dose is sometimes used in cancer patients to boost appetite and is also used for people with certain inflammatory disorders. Personally, any dose at this range or above just completely puts me on my ass. The come up is nice for me as I feel very laughy, energetic, and social, but once the effects really start peaking, I honestly begin to struggle to stay awake and wish to do nothing else but to find a cozy place to lie down and fall asleep. This may have been due to the strain though, as THC isn't the only psychoactive chemical in weed, it's just the most prominent. CBD is the chemical that aids with sleep, and this chemical also plays a role in the overall effects of the weed, and the amount of CBD in this strain will most definitely impact your experience. And finally, the extremely high dose is going to be anything above 100 milligrams. I've heard of some edibles having 250 milligrams, some having 500, and even some containing as much as 1,000 milligrams. Obviously, the effects will get significantly higher as dose increases. A 100 milligram edible might not be incredibly strong for someone with a very high tolerance, but certainly 500 milligrams is going to put anybody on their ass. Be very careful with consuming edibles this powerful, as there will certainly be negative effects due to the intensity. It's in these very high doses that I've experienced visuals reminiscent of a psychedelic trip on, say, LSD. The visual might be something kind of like this. And speaking of psychedelics, there's many people who report having psychedelic-like trips from high doses of weed edibles. The world-famous Joe Rogan likes to discuss edible pot as along the same lines as psychedelics such as LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, and DMT, saying that edible pot can take you down the rabbit hole. There's a comment I found from someone on Reddit that I thought described the similarity of the psychedelic feeling on high-dose edibles perfectly. Not long ago, I did 100 milligrams of THC, edibles, and had zero tolerance. On my couch, eyes closed and no music, it was awesome, and the peak was over 3 hours. I swam through the psychedelic mind, a tunnel with many doors, and behind each door was a memory of mine. I went through them and had total recall. I could recall past memories, memories of being born, my first laugh before thinking, and the experience of my first thought as an infant, the pure thrill of thinking. Now, the effects of THC in the brain is nowhere close to resembling that of a psychedelic. Classical psychedelics interact directly with the 5-HT2A receptor in the brain, and cannabis does not do this. From doing research, it seems to be that weed edibles tend to resemble psychedelics more often for people who have already had experiences with psychedelics in the past. It's likely more often that this psychedelic feeling is also associated with strains with higher THC levels and lower CBD levels, as CBD's antipsychotic effects will likely lessen the psychedelic effect. But if you find yourself feeling like you're in the middle of an intense psychedelic trip, I'll say what I've always said before. Let the experience consume you. Surrender to the substance. Let your mind flow freely, and try not to attach yourself to these thoughts. Just simply observe. Don't make any attachments. So that's about it for this video. Hopefully you have a better idea on what you can expect to feel by the different doses of weed edibles. If you're new, start low. THC affects everyone slightly differently, so see how you react to the substance. Stay safe, consume responsibly, and you'll be fine. If you seek to support my work on a deeper level, consider joining the Patreon. I run a book club on there where we read one book a month about topics we go over on this channel. If that interests you, definitely consider joining. As always, guys, have a great day and peace.